Well, good. I'm here. This is starting just like I thought it would. Me looking into the screen, wondering if anyone is out there and if I'm even doing this right. This is my first Facebook Live. Actually, my second one. The first one was the promo that I did. So check in. Let me know you're here. Chime in with your location and maybe tell us if you could live anywhere in the world for 1 year, where would that be? And once again, my name is John. I am a dietitian and diabetes educator for UF Health in Jacksonville, Florida. I manage a workplace wellness program for our healthcare workforce in Jacksonville. Also have experience teaching sports nutrition. In my role also at UF, I'm doing a lot of diabetes education and writing, but also picked up a hobby several years ago of doing stand-up comedy. So we'll talk a little bit about that today as we move forward. It is April Fool's Day, so you can imagine a lot of pressure on a comedian to deliver some quality content on April Fool's Day. So we got Alabama in the house. We've got Dallas, Texas in the house, wants to live in Belgium. So hello, Danielle. Hello, Rachel. Hello, Jennifer. I'm hoping I'm getting everyone that's commenting here. Again, I'm a rookie, so I want to make sure I'm delivering something of value. I was looking at all the other videos through Build Up Dietitians that have been done, and I found a video for a Taco Bell dietitian, which I'll be honest with you, I thought that was an April Fool's joke. So hey, I think that's a pretty cool job. To be the dietitian for Taco Bell. My job, maybe not quite as cool, but I still think we have a lot of fun. So again, continue to chime in with what you're doing and what's going on, and we'll get this party started right around 12 o'clock or so. Hopefully you can hear me okay. You see I've got my air traffic controller camera set up here. So again, this is always good to be on a video call with yourself. Like I'm just looking right at myself. This is like a running solo Zoom call here. So let's see if I can figure out who else is chiming in here. And again, anything you want to ask questions about as it relates to workplace wellness, especially in this day and age, and some of the components that you might try to incorporate into your practice, any other comments you might have in the field of sports nutrition and diabetes education, be happy to address that as well. I'm going to talk today a little bit more extensively about our operation here at UF Health, but also kind of share some stories from the stage and how I think humor can be a pretty valuable asset when it comes to trying to deliver memorable content. You know, as dietitians, we often are presenting messages that I think, you know, many of our clients have heard in one way or another, perhaps over the years. But I do think adding some elements of humor does help boost retention, and not to mention also builds trust. I think when we're developing relationships with our clients, that trust, as you know, is an essential component. And I've used humor quite a bit to try to break down some of those barriers that can sometimes exist. But there's a time and place for everything. So we're not going to obviously be joking with every single person that we're talking to or through every single presentation. But there is opportunity to deliver it tactfully, strategically, but also more importantly, funny. That's the big part of humor. It probably should be funny. So as people continue to check in here, I'm glad we got, Manhattan is in the house. Good. Anywhere else? San Francisco. I love San Francisco. That's one of my favorite towns to visit. I don't know if I've mentioned this. I did say I work for UF Health. I'm based in Jacksonville, Florida. So again, we are in Florida, where despite what you may have seen in the news, we believe in COVID. Our governor may share some different thoughts, but COVID's still going on. But fortunately, we are seeing quite the reduction in caseload, at least on the inpatient side. So again, we are managing it as best we can, just like every other healthcare facility. Yeah, Danielle, that's a good point. Humor works for a lot of your bariatric patients. They're nervous and a good distraction. So yeah, very good. All right, Milwaukee's in the house. Chicago's in the house. Hey, Sierra. Hey, Noreen. Noreen, not to make this all about myself, although my name is up there. It says Jon Vredenburg. I am going to Chicago in May. I am going to see my favorite baseball team, not the Cubs. I'm going to see the Los Angeles Dodgers play the Cubs as part of my 50th birthday celebration. So I'm sure you're all wondering, I wonder what he's going to be doing. That's your answer right there. All right, so I'm going to give it a couple more minutes as far as getting people settled in and get all their, get your food out of the microwave, whatever it is you're doing right now, whatever time zone you're in. It's high noon here in Jacksonville, so wherever you might be, if you want to take a few moments to get organized, get situated, and we will definitely get this party started. There's a lot of, Leah, I don't know if you're watching, there's a lot of information on this screen. I'm looking at stream metrics. I'm looking at audio bit rate and frame rate and all kinds of other terms that I don't understand. So hopefully we're doing this the right way. So, Noreen's a Cubs fan. Well, I do apologize. Nobody's perfect, Noreen. Nobody's perfect. So, very good. Also says on my screen here I have 5 reactions. I don't know if those reactions are good or bad, but in my mind, I'm going to say they're good, so we'll go with that. I can also send 200 stars to see your comment here. I don't know what that means, but that sounds pretty impressive to have 200 stars. Keith, yes, humor, the time and place are critical, but yeah, permission to laugh, I think, is very helpful. And it's something that we're actually exploring a little bit more in detail here at UF Health, at least in employee wellness. I can't speak obviously for every medical practice within our large hospital, but we want to give our staff that has been through just a tremendous amount over the past 2 years. It's okay to take your job seriously, but you don't have to take yourself seriously, and giving them permission to laugh and letting them know that we're all in this together. And I think humor is a very underrated element, as I mentioned before, as far as building trust. Again, not being a clown, but because they're frightening, but building trust as far as keeping people engaged and understand that we are in this together. And again, there's a time and place for everything. So I want to go ahead and kind of, I don't have a specific agenda, as far as what we want to try to accomplish here today. I want to try to be a resource to you, but talk a little bit about what I do right now with workplace wellness. So I manage a team of wellness coordinators. I have a dietitian on staff. I have a massage therapist on staff. I have a couple of wellness associates on staff, and we're all hired to take care of our healthcare workforce. We're an institution with over 6,000 employees across several properties in the Jacksonville, Florida area. And what we are trying to do is provide resources to the employees to lead healthier lives. I think when workplace wellness was first launched industry-wide, so not just in healthcare but across many businesses, the overarching message was we want to help lower healthcare costs. The genesis of wellness was that, well, healthier employees are less costly employees, less healthcare claims. The problem is if you look at the research about workplace wellness and ROI, there's not a lot of good data to support it. And in fact, most of that research that's been done is showing that it's not really doing the job. But it's also very difficult to tease out some of the elements to show a direct cause and effect relationship between workplace wellness and healthcare costs, because just the nature of how insurance is structured through pooled participants, those improvements from one person to another kind of get lost in the sea of 6,000 other members. So we've managed to kind of convince administration that we also need to be looking at other facets of improvements other than the healthcare claim. Now, again, it's important. We use healthcare claims to help us determine which direction to take for health management programs like blood pressure and diabetes and weight. But we're now also tailoring wellness to help lower turnover and boost morale, things that really are tough to quantify but are still very important, especially in healthcare. If we can help reduce turnover by just 1 percentage point, that's going to go a long way at reducing the administrative burden on other employees, as well as some of the costs that we are having to lay out for recruiting. So we're looking to help structure, workplace wellness in a lot of different facets outside of the traditional cost and return on investment. So some of the things that we're doing a little bit differently than traditional workplace wellness program, at least in my experience over the past 20 or so years doing similar roles, is that we've really tried to branch out some of our programs beyond just lunch and learns and nutrition education and weight management counseling and blood pressure counseling and all about sickness, but also looking to do some other cool things that gets employees really excited. So as I said, we've hired a massage therapist. This is a cost-neutral position, meaning the employees are basically paying for massage, but what we are charging is just a fraction, maybe 20% of the rate that you would find on outside massage therapy clinics here in town. So they love the massage. They can book it very easily. Here on campus, we've established a lending library. So in our lobby, we've got a pretty extensive library of books that employees can come in and check out at their own leisure and borrow. We've also partnered with a local kitchen to serve as not necessarily a food bank, but a location where these companies can drop off pre-prepared meals that employees can come pick up in our lobby, take home, and then they have themselves a healthier meal option compared to something from a takeout window. So these are some of the other things that we are doing that are really tough to quantify from a financial standpoint, but I think are going a long way to help to solidify our place as far as helping boost morale, maintain employee well-being, and hopefully reduce employee turnover. So those are some of the other things I kind of wanted to touch on. Keith, again, it's hard to measure because it's different things to different people. And I do think quality of life measures are better, but they are challenging to measure. And really all we have that we can do to measure it indirectly is we look at turnover. But again, there's the financial component. No one's staying with UF Health just because we have a masseuse. If they're going to get offered a higher salary to do the same thing somewhere else, they'll probably still take it. But when we look at some of our aggregate employee surveys that are done on an annual basis about perceived stress levels, organizational structure, employee well-being, we are seeing much higher ratings over the past 5 years in terms of workplace wellness compared to the previous 5 years. And I think a lot of that starts from having good buy-in from administration, having the administration really get out there and push the importance of taking time for yourself, when possible. Now, again, our population is very diverse in terms of what they are doing, but getting that leadership buy-in to push that is a very important piece as far as workplace wellness goes. So again, any questions you have, type them there in the chat. Otherwise, it's just going to be me and Keith just chatting away here, and then maybe me making fun of Noreen's Chicago Cubs. No, just kidding. But I don't want to alienate anybody. So let's see, what else? What else can we talk about? Well, let's not bury the lead here. This is April Fool's Day. This is a big holiday for amateur comedians. I don't know how many people have already been subjected to April Fool's joke. I did tell my team that we had an emergency meeting at 6:00 p.m. today to talk about organizational restructuring, but of course I was just kidding. So that was my little April Fool's joke to them, and they loved it. They did not love it. So anyway, what we look at with humor in the workplace, and I mentioned some of the things that I think humor can be helpful across a variety of disciplines, and I think humor builds trust. I think it helps foster retention, and I also do think it helps maintain an attentiveness. When we look at a lot of the content in nutrition and wellness it can be very heavy. It can be a lot to take in at times, and I've been to several classes where you're talking about a very important topics and people are just kind of zoning out. So I've used humor to try to help maintain attentiveness, and I've seen some pretty good success when we look at some of the post-program survey data. One of the things that I learned the most about the ability to connect with the audience using humor is through a 6-hour sports nutrition course. I used to teach for a company called Cross Country Education, and then it was purchased by another company or renamed Vine Education, and now it's PESI Education, so PESI. So they're still out there generating content, and I'm actually going back to do another seminar with them, but going back, I think 2009 when I first started to do this sports nutrition course. It was just a basic sports nutrition course that was marketed to physical therapists and occupational therapists and dietitians and a whole host of healthcare professionals and athletic trainers. What I found after the first few rounds of doing this class, I was so focused on hitting these key objectives that I realized that towards the end of the day, like 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock, you'd see that glazed look on people's eyes. So I decided to kind of reformat a little bit and throw in a little bit of humor basically every hour to try to do something fun with them. And just, again, this is anecdotal. You can't really measure how awake were you for this whole class, but I can see on the post-program survey data that they comment on that and say, hey, the speakers ability to keep things lively and engaged, and adding a little bit of humor really helped get the message across. So I think it's something that can be explored, and it is something that can be taught. Now, when I say teaching humor, I'm not talking about being a stand-up comedian. That's a totally different aspect altogether. But I'm talking about challenging yourself to think outside the box and channel some of those creative outlets. One of the things that we did for our employees as part of a broader humor initiative, when we talk about humor in healthcare, is that we would have a caption the photo contest. So we'd have a random photo that would go out there, and we'd send it out to our employees, and we give a prize. We give like a 30-minute massage or whatever tangible gifts that we have, just to help get those creative juices flowing. And we got some pretty hilarious entries as far as the caption this photo part. And I think it's a good strategy to help generate some creative content, which can help build that humor. The one thing that we do tell our employees when we talk about using humor in a workplace setting, which is essentially where all of us would be using it, is that it can't alienate at all. When I say at all, we're not talking about any segment of the population. Even if you wanted to talk about maybe some of the nonsense regarding CrossFit or maybe the inappropriate use of a gluten-free diet, those are the types of things that can alienate people. So any type of direction that is going to be negative obviously is not advisable in a workplace setting unless it's self-deprecating. Now, on stage, I can get away with talking about gluten-free diets and CrossFit because it's not mean-spirited, and that's part of the strategic direction of humor. But again, in a workplace setting, it can't alienate any group at all. It has to be the most inclusive form of humor possible, which is sometimes the most difficult to project. So again, that's really where using the activities to stimulate those creative juices can be very important, like captioning random photos and doing some of the improv exercises that are available and out there are good outlets for you. But again, in the workplace setting, we don't want it to alienate at all. It needs to be all inclusive and definitely not not mean-spirited or, of course, any type of political or racial or religious overtones. That should be common sense, but again, needs to be said. Keith, you're loaded with questions here. Well, I'm glad you are, because you're the only one asking them. No, I'm just kidding. I'm sure all of you are just busy chewing your food right now, and maybe you're not able to ask this. So, comedy career. So, how does dietetics figure into your stand-up, and how do you humorously step into that space with audience when you deal with illness? So, let's see. What's the best way to address that? So first off, let me talk about career. That's a very generous term to say comedy career. I started to do stand-up comedy in 2014, so 8 years ago, almost 8 years ago to the date. It was part of a workshop that was had at our local comedy club, and you just come in and learn a little bit about the industry and try out for a couple of spots that they had available for some amateur comedy shows. And I did it and was able to get into that little group of comedians, and from that I discovered this entire community in just Jacksonville, in just this town alone, of comedians. And we will go out to different, I only have 2 comedy clubs here in Jacksonville, actually just 1 comedy club now, but you could do some open mics throughout town. You can go to different restaurants and bars that were organized by other semi-professional comedians, and go out and provide content. And it just kind of grew from there. So after doing it for several years, I was invited to be an MC at our comedy club here in Jacksonville, the Comedy Zone, and it kind of leveled off from there. Throughout that time, I also became a parent, so I wasn't trying to go any further in my comedy career, because it is a very tough job, and there aren't a lot of opportunities out there for comedians in general. But I wasn't willing to travel and be away from my daughter, so I've pretty much plateaued to where I think I'll end up as far as stand-up comedy goes. But it is an opportunity for me to meet several comedians that come through Jacksonville, and build some of my own material, and kind of build some relationships from there. I've even a few years ago, I did a couple of stand-up bits for SCAN, the Sports Nutrition and Wellness Practice Group. I tricked them into performing at a couple of their symposiums. No, I asked nicely, but they said yes, so it went well. So that's it as far as the career aspect of comedy. And again, it's something that I still enjoy doing. I just had a show last night, actually, and it's something that I'm actually trying to do a little bit more. As you can guess, in 2020, the entire comedy world stopped. I mean, think about the industries that were closely scrutinized during the start of the pandemic, when the advice was like, all right, look, it's very important that you stay isolated and do not go into any type of crowded environment with poor ventilation. It's pretty much every comedy club in America, so everybody retired from comedy for a period of time. But it is slowly coming back, and much of my material, so a lot of it, I'm talking about being a fairly new parent. I'm kind of poking fun at the relationships with my wife. Some pretty common premises. I mean, that they've been done before, but obviously I'm just presenting it from my perspective. But I do hammer a lot on the fad diet piece, and I present it more as a comedian, not as a dietitian. I don't think outside of the shows that I've done for SCAN, I don't know if I've ever disclosed that I'm also a dietitian when I'm on stage. Not for any reason. It didn't really figure into any of the material. But what I do talk about, to get to the answer to the question, in terms of dietetics and the nutrition component, I'll come from the approach from a customer standpoint, or a client or a patient standpoint, and make fun of nutrition that way. So I talk about trying different types of foods for the first time. Like I talk about. Say, well, one time I had a gluten-free vegan pepperoni pizza, and I took it out of the oven and accidentally ate part of the cardboard tray that it came out of, and that was the best part. I was looking at the ingredients too for like a gluten-free vegan pepperoni pizza, like reading the ingredients. The very first one on the box, sadness. That's what it's made with. It's made with sadness. And I talk about how I've tried vegan mac and cheese, which I don't know if you guys have ever had vegan mac and cheese, but it's basically instead of the pasta, they're using sweet potatoes, and then instead of cheese, they just punch you in the face. Like that's the vegan mac and cheese. And then I've of course made fun of CrossFit just because look, I think it's very important to be active, but to me, CrossFit is what happens when an entire religious cult wants to get into shape. And that's it. It's basically a cross between exercising and rearranging a garage. I tried CrossFit. I felt like I could have just got a job at Tire Kingdom and gotten the same type of workout. So, so I'll talk about nutrition from that angle. And again, I don't know if that answers the question that you were looking for, but that's kind of how I've approached it before. And really, I've since the opportunities aren't as widespread to do comedy, you're never tuning on the news and be like, well, there's a nationwide shortage of comedians. You don't see that. So since I have limited opportunities to perform, I've been doing a lot lately more just talking about being a parent and the challenges and that entails, because that's something that's a lot more relatable. Now, again, eating's relatable too, don't get me wrong, but when we look at some of the key ingredients of being funny or incorporating humor is making it relatable. So yes, people will always relate to food, but they'll even more relate to raising a family. So that's kind of my approach. Now, on the other end of that question, you were talking about how to approach it when we're dealing with people who are where was the question here? Dealing with illness. Again, I don't, with an audience, I don't really approach it with anything with regards to illness. I think you're just talking about maybe on the stage, perhaps. So I haven't really approached it in that regard. But again, when I'm doing counseling, so I do a lot of work. Part of my job is as a diabetes educator for this organization for employees. So, I try to joke with them, being newly diagnosed, not joke about being newly diagnosed, but try to use humor in some of my teachings with how to use a meter. It's like, well, look, if you've got an iPhone, you can work a meter. It's basically just like a garage door opener with a few more buttons. I don't know, but try to lighten it up a little bit. That helps some of those interactions. But just really trying to smile and just be nice. I think one of the underrated components of humor is you just need to be nice. We're trying to build trust. We're trying to break down barriers, and just being nice can go a long way. You could be just dry as anything, but you can just be nice. That's really what a lot of people want more than ever these days. And it's tough to be nice and walk around when when you've got your mask on. So that's why we use our hand signals here in the hospital and wave and make sure everything's going the way it should. So hopefully I answered that question. I got a couple more questions here I want to get to. It looks like we're running out of time. Yes, there's the question I was looking for. Have you ever been slapped for any remarks you've made? I have not. I've been heckled a few times. I've been doing it for several years. It's natural to be heckled, but fortunately it's never derailed into something mean-spirited. But no, I've never been slapped. So, but there's always a first. But again, I did a show last night, and of course had to spend 5 minutes talking to the audience about some of the thank you for coming to the club. If at any time someone says something you don't agree with, just please don't come up and assault us. That's all we want. Just please be nice to us. Some of my favorite comedians, I think you would be remiss if you were a dietitian and you didn't enjoy the comedy of Jim Gaffigan. I think obviously is very food-centric in his approach and his messages, so he's one of my favorites. Also like less famous, maybe not as famous to some of you, Nate Bargatze, I find his humor pretty good because he talks a lot about the relationships with his wife. He's one of my favorites too. I like Bill Burr. He's a little bit more on the angry side. May not be for everyone. And then Brian Regan. I think Brian Regan, by and far, epitomizes the importance of not just the message itself in comedy, but how it's delivered. So if you haven't heard of Brian Regan, which I'm sure you may have, if you have not, just look up any of his clips on YouTube. We actually use one bit of his in our stress management program where he is visiting the emergency room. So you just Google Brian Regan emergency room. That's one of the things that we use to talk about how humor can help make us feel better, relieve pain, and boost cardiac output and improve blood pressure. So we use that clip as a therapeutic tool to show people, just compare and contrast how they feel before they saw that clip about going to the emergency room and then after they saw that clip, and basically just kind of demonstrating how humor can be very therapeutic there. All right, very good. So let's see. Can you talk about positive moments you have had incorporating humor and where it could go wrong? So I was mentioning before where doing this, had the 6-hour sports nutrition course, and it was like going through labor, although I've never been through labor, but I can just imagine it was very painful once you got to that 5th and 6th hour. And by adding some comedy to that whole 6-hour day, I saw a marked improvement in my quote-unquote scoring on our post-program surveys. So that's probably the most concrete evidence where I've shown that humor can be beneficial, or at least was positive. And again, it can only go wrong if you alienate somebody. So if you're, of course, talking about their beliefs, religious beliefs, political beliefs, their heritage, their food choices, anytime you start to talk negatively about what a person believes, that's where it can go wrong. And that's why it's so difficult to transfer from a comedy stage to humor in the workplace. Now, I'm a pretty tame comedian. I try to be all inclusive as much as I can, but even those few bits where I've just kind of poked fun at CrossFit, people get really upset about that, or some people get pretty upset about that. So that's where you have to kind of keep that in mind. Just make sure whatever you're discussing, it's all inclusive. And if you're mocking anything, it really should only be yourself. Like I can talk about how I'm losing my hair, but I can't talk about how somebody else is losing their hair. All right, so I think I'm hitting close on the time for today's talk. I hope this was informative. I want to make sure that I was delivering what you were looking for, and maybe, I'm not trying to talk you out of pursuing a comedy career, but if you want to know that, I say I've came across several comedians in the Jacksonville area. When I say several, there are 1,200 people in our Jacksonville Comedy Facebook group. So imagine that in every single city across America. You can see when you're seeing a comedian that has made it, like Jim Gaffigan and Sebastian Maniscalco and Brian Regan. They work long and hard to get to that point because there just aren't that many opportunities. So I always tip my hat to those people that are able to make it, because it's a combination of content, timing, and luck. And I applaud them for being able to endure what's a pretty significant grind on a person's life to make it to that level and make it to that far. Maybe I can get there one day. I don't know. But again, I tip my hat to them and go from there. So I'll leave you with this. So what food or food name makes you laugh? What food or food name makes you laugh? I have to tell you, put me on the spot there. I think I did see a sign once for boneless bananas. That made me laugh. I think that was a typo, but I think that was something that was advertised at Whole Foods. Boneless bananas. I don't know if that answers your question, but I will leave you with this. When we look at comedy, and comedy is everywhere, and it's also how you make the message. I was on a website, Fresh from Florida, so we were doing a presentation on seasonal produce, and I wanted to look up, what's in season in Florida? on our Fresh from Florida website. You can go to it yourself, freshfromflorida.com, and search what's in season. And it showed avocados, it showed melons, it showed peaches, but it also showed beef and chicken. So I was like, man, beef is really putting it out there on people to eat more beef. Beef was in season in Florida, so good for them. I didn't know that was part of the Fresh from Florida produce message, but hey, I got a chuckle out of it, and hopefully you did too. So again, thank you for having me. I appreciate monopolizing your airwaves here, and hopefully you found this informative, and I'm glad to be here. So again, everybody, have a good weekend. Be nice to one another, and don't be afraid to try to make someone laugh, even if it's yourself. Have a good day.